So today I'm going to be going over DraftProspectHockeys.com's final 2022 NHL draft rankings. So if that sounds good to you guys, do be sure to stick around to the end of the video to see my full interpretation of their rankings. But to get right into it, right off the bat, they do have Shane Wright first overall. This is one that I agree with. Slavkovsky has gained quite a bit of momentum lately. It sounds like there's a good chance he might even go first overall, but they actually have him fourth behind, in addition to Shane Wright, Logan Cooley and Matthew Savoy, which I think is quite interesting. I actually have Savoy at 5, which is generally towards the higher end for Savoy. He seems to be somewhere in the 5 to 8 range for most people. But having him ahead of a guy like Slavkovsky, I think is quite interesting. He's a far riskier pick than Slavkovsky, and I think maybe has more upside as a playmaker. Slavkovsky may be a better goal scorer at the NHL level. It's a little bit tough to say. He obviously, there's a huge size difference between those guys as well. Savoy is 5'9", and Slavkovsky is 6'4", and apparently is projected to grow to be as tall as 6'7", which would be quite interesting. You don't see too many 6'7" forwards in the National Hockey League. I mean, guys that tall in general are pretty rare, but the ones that do play in the league tend to be defensemen. After that, they have Joakim Kamel at 5. That's a bit high for Kamel, I think. Simon Nemec at 6 is pretty interesting. That's the lowest I've seen Nemec, I think. Actually, I might have seen one ranking where he was at 8. But either way, that is relatively low for Nemec. I have him at... Ooh, actually, I might have him at 6 as well. Well, I might be eating my own words on that one. It does feel a little bit low, but... I don't know. These guys are so close to each other, even in the top 10, that it's a tough call. He is potentially going to be the best defenseman to come out of this draft class. I still like Juracek more, although come to think of it, Juracek they don't have in the top 6 either. Okay, he's right there at 7. So those two guys are back to back. A lot of people have them back to back. After that, they have Jonathan Lekari-Mackey at 8. Again, that seems pretty high on him. I like Jagger Firkus more, and I'm willing to bet that Firkus is going to be quite a bit lower than 8. 9, they have Danila Yurov. This one I don't really get at all. I like Yurov, but he's definitely not a top 10 talent in my opinion. 10 is Frank Nazar, which I like a lot actually. I like Frank Nazar. I think he's generally a bit underrated. See him in the top 10. Uh, um, yeah, that's a little bit higher than other people have him, I think. Although, man, I really gotta just write down these other rankings because I'm actually not entirely certain what the consensus on him is. But in the top 10 is good for him, I think. Cutter Gauchi at 11, not a player I'm in love with. This is lower than some other people have him, though. I have him at 15 in my final rankings. And yeah, it's just, I'm not sure exactly how much upside is there with Gautier. I know he put up a ton of points with the USDP this season, but I think his numbers were a little bit inflated. Obviously, he's playing on a fantastic squad. At 12, they have Ivan Miroshnichenko. That also seems pretty high for Miroshnichenko, but given his talent level, I get it. At 13, they have Brad Lambert, which is a little bit low, but that actually seems to be realistic. I believe Bob McKenzie had him at 14. So he's probably actually going to go in this range, perhaps not as low as people might have thought, maybe even as high as 11. If the Sharks take him, that would be pretty awesome. But yeah, I have Lambert in my top 10, but 13, I think it's reasonable. 14, they have Connor Geekie, which is kind of interesting because he is quite a bit ahead of Marco Kasper here, it looks like. And I like Kasper more. And even then, I don't love Marco Kasper. Geekie is a guy who I've talked about a lot on this channel. And quite frankly, I just don't like him that much. I have him at the end of my first round. 15 is Yuri Kulik, which is also quite interesting. That's very high for Kulak, I think. Plenty of people do have him in the first round, but generally it's towards the end of the first round. I'm pretty sure I have him at 40. So I don't quite see it at 15 for Kulik, to be honest, but hey, everybody's entitled to their opinions, of course. At 16, they have Rucker McGroarty. This is another player that I don't love. I have him towards the tail end of my first round, I believe. Not too much to say about him. At 17, they have Kevin Korchinski, and that makes him their third highest ranked defenseman, which makes sense. He was my third highest ranked defenseman for most of the season. Now I have a couple more defensemen ahead of him, I believe, but I will freely admit one guy I have ahead of him is Vladimir Grudinin, and that is a bit of a hot take. I have Grudinin way higher than pretty much everybody else. At 18, they have Isaac Howard. That's a pick that I like a lot in that spot. It's a bit high for him, I think, but I like Isaac Howard a lot, so taking a swing at him at that point in the draft, I think is totally reasonable. At 19, they have Pavel Mintyukov, which, given his upside, that could be a fantastic player to get in that range of the draft. I believe that is a little bit higher as well than other people have him, especially compared to other defensemen in the draft. I can't quite remember if I have him just above Korchinski. If I remember correctly, I have Korchinski and Mintyukov quite close as well. At 20, they have Liam Ogren, which is kind of funny because I'm pretty sure I also have Liam Ogren at 20, or if not, very close to that range. So agree pretty strongly there. At 21, they have Denton Mateychuk. Again, Mateychuk is kind of just a tough player to read. The way he plays the game as a defender, I'm not sure how well it will translate to the NHL. He definitely has a very unique style. Reasonably skilled, not the highest skilled guy in terms of defenders in this draft class. Reasonably good skater though, and who knows if you're going to swing at him at 21. I think it's a bit risky to take him that high, but the tools are there potentially for a really good defenseman. At 22, they have Noah Ostlund. Ostlund is a player that I was pretty skeptical of most of the season, but I have warmed up to him a bit. I have him back to back with Liam Ogren, so again, very close to their rankings. He's a guy that has a ton of upside, I think, but a lot of downside as well. He's risky, anyways. At 23, they have Marco Kasper. That's a fine ranking for Kasper in isolation, but given that they have Geeky, let's see, 9 spots higher than him, that's pretty weird, but that says more about their ranking of Geeky than Kasper, I think. Kasper's a guy who I think is probably going to play a third line center role in the NHL, so getting that in the last third of the first round is perfectly reasonable. 24, they have Jimmy Snuggerud. Not a player that I think has a ton of upside, but we're kind of getting into that point of the draft where there's not a ton of upside left available, and the guys that do have a lot of upside are generally pretty risky. So a guy like Snuggerud at 24, sure, why not? At 25, they have Seamus Casey, which is kind of interesting. He's a guy that does have a lot of upside, but is not a great skater and is relatively small, or is actually quite small, especially for a defenseman. So that's really where the risk comes from. That small with not great skating combination really worries me a lot with a guy like Seamus Casey. But I think the offensive tools are there for a power play one quarterback if he becomes a better skater and really develops well. 26, they have Philip Machar. Yeah, another guy kind of like Snuggerud at this point in the draft. You're not getting a guy with a ton of upside. Machar, though, I think could be a reasonable bottom 6 guy who can play on the penalty kill and give you good minutes in that role, and also have enough offensive upside to maybe play second power play unit time a little bit, score a little bit on the third line there. So again, getting a player like that late in the first round is fine. I think there's going to be more players like that in general to come out of this draft class. Some guys that are going to get drafted early might be a little bit disappointing because they will play a role like that when you're hoping to get a little bit more upside, especially like say in the first 20 picks or so. I just don't think there's a ton of super high end talent in this draft in general. At 27, Tristan Luneau. they are way higher on him than I am. I have him. I don't. He's not in my first round. I'm pretty sure he's in my top 50, but relatively close to the bottom of my top 50. He's shown flashes, but of skill, but I think he needs to work on his consistency and his skating and defensive game in general. His offensive creativity as well. Like he's shown flashes of it, but not at a rate that would really get me excited about drafting him at 27. And here we go, Jagger Furcus at 28. That's way too low on Furcus for me. He's a guy that I think has the best shot in the draft. In addition to being a relatively solid playmaker, he's small. He's 5'10", listed at 5'10", 154 according to them, and that's pretty accurate, I think. Relatively shorter player with a slim frame. And to be honest, I think the main thing that Furcus does need to do is just work on his size. Like add muscle, right? I mean, there's only so much you can do to that. You can't like magically make yourself grow. If he's done growing, he's done growing, but he could add muscle to his frame, and I think that'll be a big thing for him, especially considering how powerful his shot already is. For a small guy, he has a really powerful shot, and it's really accurate as well. And he's a guy that I think has 30 goal upside easily. So getting him that late in the draft, I think would be a massive steal. I have him just outside my top 10. At 29, they have Jack Hughes. He's a player that is kind of another tough read for me, just because he played NCAA hockey, which is pretty uncommon for draft eligible players. I think he held his own in the NCAA, especially considering he's playing mostly against older, stronger competition. But I don't know, late first round, yeah, sure. He's a guy that could go anywhere from late first to like late second for me. One of the more interesting names to watch towards the end of day one or potentially day two of the draft. At 30, they have Ryan Chesley. Chesley's not a guy I'm really excited about. I think he has a little bit of offensive upside, but in general, I don't know, maybe a bottom pair defenseman. That's probably the most likely role he develops into. Which at the end of the first round, if you're getting a player like that, sure. But at the same time, there are a lot of players that are going to go in this range that have significantly higher upside. At 31, they have Ty Nelson. And Nelson is a player that is really frustrating to watch. I think he has skill. He's undersized, but he doesn't really use that skill. He is a dump and chase guy, which is admittedly kind of his whole team shtick. They're in North Bay. They're a very get pucks deep type of team, and Nelson kind of fits that mold, but I don't think that's the role he should be playing. So whoever drafts him, I don't know. It worries me a bit to be taking a guy like that in the first round. At 32, though, quite interestingly, they have Matthias Havlid, another undersized defenseman who has a ton of upside. I think a lot more than the guy like Nelson or Chesley. So a bit risky, yeah. But if you're taking a guy like that in the late first round, I think that's a pretty decent bet. At 33, they have Leon Bichel, and I just realized I only meant to go over the first round. But sure, let's talk about Leon Bichel a little bit. He's huge, one of the bigger guys in this draft at 6'5", 216 pounds, and he skates pretty well. So I think he could play a very reasonable middle pairing to bottom pairing role. Probably won't bring a lot of offense to the NHL, but could be a decent shutdown guy who can give you a bit of physicality as well. So that is draftprospecthockey.com first round rankings. Interestingly, I will scan through their rankings here a little bit. Lane Hudson at 35 is one that I like. Maverick Lammer at 46 is one that I don't like. I was very tempted to leave him out of my top 100. I think he barely squeaked in at like 96 or something. Let's see, who else here? Julian Lutz at 63. That seems pretty low for him. Jordan Dumais at 64 is a little high, but I can kind of see it, I guess. Trikazov at 66 is way too low for him. I have him in my top 10, although I do think that is a little bit of a hot take, to be honest. And then Vladimir Grudinin, though, here again at 72. Again, that is criminally low on Grudinin. I think he's the best skating defenseman in this draft class for sure, in my opinion. And with Grudinin, I think the sky's the limit. But yeah, that's their draft. That's their draft rankings. There, I will leave a link to this in the description below if you want to check out their full top 100. And that'll be it for this video. So if you thought it deserved a like, please do give it a like. That really helps me out. I will put another video on screen right now, just in case you want to stick around for a while, watch another video. In fact, I'll link you to my top 100 rankings as well, so you could kind of compare mine to theirs. And whatever you do, though, have a nice day.